Good morning, everybody. To start with, I would like to thank COVID fighters for their interest in my specialty and for their interest in this hot topic. As they say, it's everybody's interest at the moment, all over the world, and so on. What I will try to do, COVID fighters have sent me some questions, so I'll try to briefly go through these interesting questions. And to start with, a first question, which says, do some viruses have a direct targeted treatment? As we know, antiviral drugs are limited compared, of course, to antibiotics. Antibiotics, of course, work on bacteria, but antiviral drugs are limited and they work on viruses. Now, to understand antiviral drugs, obviously we need to understand first the physiology or the biology of the organism itself. And fortunately, at the moment, there is quite a lot of information regarding its biology. And the main thing about viruses in general is that the virus itself requires a host. It cannot live without a cell. So on its own, it cannot replicate. So the virus needs to find appropriate host. Appropriate host, it means it needs to have special receptors on the host that are specific for its own proteins in there, or surface antigens. So these surface antigens bind on the appropriate receptors in the host and then enters into the host. Once inside, after injecting its own nuclear material, it uses the cell's machinery to self-replicate in there, assemble, so it forms the spare parts or the required proteins in there, and it starts, of course, to replicate, completes the cycle, and then comes out of the cell. Once these viruses inside the cell, they come out, they go on to other surface cells and they infect them and so on. So the strategy here, then, we have two possibilities here. One is to prevent its attachment. If it cannot attach, it cannot cause disease. And therefore, this is one of the treatment strategies to do that. And there are some trials at the moment. Most up-to-date information on that is that there are some antiviral drugs that inhibits its attachment. If we manage to do that, then it is possible then to prevent its entry and therefore its survival and replication. So this is one approach. Second approach for treatment is that once it's inside the cell, so we cannot prevent its entry, once it's inside the cell, there are some drugs that act on its essential enzymes in these cells, because it does require some enzymes in the cells to replicate itself. So there are some drugs that work on this strategy. As we know, it is a virus that has RNA. And luckily, RNA, of course, viruses, they cannot repair their own RNA, unlike DNA viruses, because DNA viruses, they have facilities or they have their own ways of correcting if there are any mistakes in there. So what the drug does is that, or the strategy in other words, it does actually, scientists, they introduce a fake part of the RNA into the RNA of the virus. We cheat the virus doesn't know that it's a fake part in there, and therefore it cannot replicate and so on. So that's the most up-to-date about the treatment as a treatment. But later on we'll be talking, of course, about other ways like using, for instance, vaccines and so on. But let's go now to the second question. Second question says, are there memory cell specific for COVID-19? How will the body react in case it is infected again? It's a two-part question. The first part, of course, the immunology of the virus, it's not very well understood. It's still in its primitive parts, but obviously it's excusable because the virus is novel, so not much studies have been done on it. However, there are some scientists that have published some work in a very reputable journal, Nature Medicine, whereby, of course, they have noticed that there are 4 types of immune cells that are recruited during the infection, and they are actually present in high levels when the infection is active. And then these levels of these immune cells, the 4 types, they go down in numbers as the patient recovers, which indicates, of course, the importance of these cells in the progress of the disease. It is limited study. It's been done only on one patient, a lady who was 40 years old, and it's limited, as I said, but nevertheless it is a possible way for not only knowing the function of these cells in their defense mechanisms, but also in the progress of the disease in a patient. So if we monitor these levels of cells as they go down, we know that the patient will be recovering and so on. So this is the second question. Third question, can someone get infected with COVID-19 yet have no or very mild symptoms? Yes, it is possible. As we know, 80% of the cases so far, they actually suffer from only minor infections or minor symptoms, and they do recover after that. And sometimes some people may actually have the disease with very mild symptoms and go unnoticed, so they don't know if they had actually COVID-19 virus or if they have actually another cold or another flu or whatever. So this is a possibility. But as far as immunity acquired after the infection, we may add that immunity is present. So people who get infected, they do not normally get infected again because their immune system memorizes these cells or the virus, and then on second exposure the immune system is ready to defend itself. There are, however, some exceptional cases whereby reinfection may have happened, but that's very, very rare. Not only rare, but also probably the patients may have their immune system compromised in one way or another, or their immune system is very weak due to some underlying illnesses or some other diseases, or being treated with immunosuppressant drugs and so on. So that way, of course, their immune system is not memorizing the virus, and therefore the exposure second time may possibly occur or take place, but it is exceptional. That's another thing. Number 4, can pregnant mothers who have COVID-19 transmit the virus to the fetus? There are very rare studies that have been done in this area. But what the Chinese have done in their control of the disease, they put pregnant women separately from other patients, because we know pregnant women tend to be immunosuppressed somehow, obviously for obvious reasons, so that the body does not reject the fetus or the baby in there, and so on. And what it seems from limited studies on limited numbers of pregnant women, babies have been born, they have suffered, the pregnant women suffered from the disease. They gave birth to the babies. Some of the babies, some, not all of them, but some have suffered some respiratory problems, distresses, and so on. But most of them were negative to COVID-19, which is a good news. Possibly it's not actually passed on from the pregnant woman or from the mother to the baby. Another question, what caused the uncontrollable widespread of COVID-19 in Italy? Now, this is very interesting question, and Italians, I think, in my opinion, they were a little bit slow in their reaction to the outbreak or to the disease, because what happened is that they actually did not react immediately, so the virus spread within the community, caused a lot of diseases, and then they realized that there is a problem in there. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that Italy is the second country in the world that they have actually 25% of their population aged above 65. And so they have a significant number of elderly people or people above 65, second to Japan. Of course, Japan is the highest. I think they have about 40% of their population is above 65 years of age. So that possibly, again, is another possibility, because of that number of people that are above 65, and we know the behavior of the virus at the moment, that it infects mainly elderly people, and mortality rate, of course, as we know, it increases with age. Even above 80, it may reach as high as 15 to 18% mortality rate. So it is, and it's understandable, of course, because elderly people tend to have their immune system fairly weak, and obviously become more susceptible to the disease. Now, once the virus is spread in Italy, obviously the medical staff, health authorities in there were overwhelmed by the number of cases in there. With the resources, of course, became limited as a result of high numbers of people or patients in there, and obviously that has led to high mortality rate in that country. So this is one question. Another one, do you think COVID-19 will be contained and remain under control in Lebanon? Well, it's very difficult at the moment to tell, but so far it's good news. It's really good at the moment, and I believe the good news is that, and the good action from the government, that the control, of course, measures, some of them have been taken, of course, very early in the outbreak, like closing schools down and universities, preventing, of course, gathering and crowded events and so on. And later on, obviously, more advanced quarantine, if you like, or measures have been taken to lessen, of course, the transmissibility of the disease. And obviously, to be honest, the Lebanese people were really cooperative in that, because remember, the government on its own in any country, the government actions on its own cannot really complete the success. The citizens or people in the country have to respond. And I must say the Lebanese people were and still aware of this problem, and I think they are doing very well in their actions. And we have seen in the streets in the capital and in many areas people taking actions on their own to reduce, of course, being exposed to the virus, and of course being exposed to somebody who is infected. All of that, of course, does help in reducing the number of cases. But nevertheless, time will tell. Of course, there is still time. We will see, of course, what's going to happen in the next few days. Maybe this week or next week we'll have a better picture. So as time goes by, we will understand the behavior of the virus in Lebanon better. And possibly I will go to the following question, because it is related to this area. What duties is the government supposed to do with regards to COVID-19 in Lebanon? I think the best thing to do in any country, including ours, of course, is to test. The main thing is to test as much as possible. The idea here of testing, of course, is to detect these cases, try, of course, to find the positive cases, isolate them, and more importantly, to follow up the contacts as well, because people who came in contact with somebody who was positive for the coronavirus or COVID-19 virus, or the formal name for it is now SARS-CoV-2. That, of course, obviously can help a lot in trying to contain the outbreak or contain the number of cases in there, to remain as low as possible, so that the medical staff can actually handle these cases and not overwhelmed by the cases and so on. So this is one possibility. Another thing I must add, because we talked about Lebanon, we talked about Italy, I have my own opinion about the possibility or why the virus is so widely spread. And it's really getting very fast and exponentially in many countries, and so on. So this is still a mystery. We know that every person infected with the virus can pass it on to at least 2 or 3 people, maybe more. So this is one way of explaining why it's spreading so fast. This is really a problem. My own opinion, if I may add to this, is possibly due to the virus size. It's very important because it's been sent over the social media saying the cells are 400 micrometers or 500 micrometers. They are very large and whatever. It's wrong. First of all, the virus is not a cell. The virus is a particle. Virus, some scientists consider it non-living because it doesn't have the characteristics of a living cell. So it is a viral particle. Now, this viral particle size ranges from about 120 to 140 nanometers. So, in this case, the droplets released from infected person, like saliva or mucus or whatever, yes, they are large. They may contain the virus. They do not stay long in the atmosphere because they are heavy. So they don't remain suspended in the air for a very long period of time. They settle as a result of their weight. However, The virus is extremely small, 120 to 140 nanometers. Such a particle is too small to settle down on the surfaces very quickly. And therefore, if somebody sneezes, he or she may be releasing free viruses, may remain suspended in the atmosphere for a very long period of time, possibly hours, we don't know. Minutes, we don't know. But if it remains for a significant length of time, people may inhale it and may cause disease. Now, that's my own opinion, by the way. There is no scientific evidence for that because obviously studies are still being done. Another point and final point on this transmissibility issue is that how many viruses are required to cause disease? Because we know in microbiology or in microbes, each microbe requires to have a certain number to be able to cause disease in humans, which we call it infective dose. Now, is this virus really very aggressive and we require only very few of those viral particle or virus particles to cause disease in humans? If that's the case, then it may explain why it's spreading so fast and so on. But as I said, this is based on my own analysis. There is no scientific evidence for that, but possibly in the future it may be proven either way in any case. Coming to question number 8, what treatments are being considered? Are there any promising solutions? We've covered that at the very beginning. Yes, there are. There are many drugs targeting the RNA. Other scientists are working on inhibiting, of course, the attachment of the virus to the cell, and therefore, if it cannot go into the cell, it cannot cause disease, obviously. But we may add to treatments, in this case here, vaccines, because treatment we include, of course, antivirals, and we include, of course, vaccines as well. In my opinion, antiviral drugs are going to be the fast solution to our problem. That's my opinion. Vaccine, it's a long term. It is effective because we know we have been very successful with vaccines against viruses and some bacteria as well. But viruses in particular, and some viruses have been eradicated or almost eradicated. Smallpox has been eradicated as a result of effective vaccine in there. Polio virus is on its way, it's almost eradicated. So vaccine is the best. However, it's the time. So it's racing, of course, with time here, and vaccines cannot be available, I think, before 1 year, 1 year and a half. Even if we find it today, that's the time scale we are talking about. Not only that, it's the time required, of course, it's for testing the immunogenicity of the vaccine, how effective at recruiting the immune system, that's one thing. Two is that how the immune system would react to it. 3, the safety is mega important because you cannot immediately apply the vaccine or use it for humans. It needs to be done on animals to see its behavior, to see its efficacy, its immunogenicity, protection. And another thing, by the way, how long that immunity is going to last. Because we know now people are recovering, of course, from the infection with very minor illnesses. They have immunity, but how long that immunity is going to last, we do not know. Only time will tell again in this case. So vaccines obviously is a long term. There are candidate vaccines in Germany. We don't have, of course, to the best of my knowledge, I have no idea about the exact way they are or the strategy used in that vaccine, nor that in China. But the one in United States, of course, they are using, of course, a part of the RNA of the virus, because obviously we have the genome sequenced now for the virus. The Chinese have done that in the first few weeks of the outbreak. They took the sequence of that genome, distributed to everybody. All scientists around the world had access to it. By understanding, of course, the genome sequence, we can determine, of course, all these parts in the genome, take possibly a good candidate part of that and inject it into volunteers, and that's what they have done. It's the messenger RNA, of course. So they injected into these 45 volunteers in the States. They have now injected them. They will be followed for the next 1 month or so, 29 days to be exact. They will be given one shot on day 1 and another shot on day 28. Different groups will be given different quantities. The idea here is that they will assume that this piece of RNA will go into the cell of the human being, manufacture or synthesize specific proteins of the virus, which can the immune system then recognize and generate antibodies. Now, if we are then subsequently exposed to the virus, the immune system learned or memorized this antigen, and then it can attack it and hopefully protect us against the disease. But this study, of course, will take about 3 months now to get an idea about the immune response, all 45 volunteers being followed up for their fever, for their immune response, depending on the doses, different doses that they are given. But these have to be followed up to about 14 months to see what happened in phase 1. And there are, unfortunately, some more phases, 3 or 4 phases before we go into human studies. So it is a long-term solution. But as I said, probably antivirals are going to be faster in this case. And finally, is quarantine the ultimate solution? I touched on that throughout the presentation or through the video. I think quarantine is the best way at the moment. Anybody who's infected has to be isolated. Any contacts with those individuals infected with the virus to be quarantined as well. Quarantine, of course, is very important to limit the spread of the disease. And finally, just to finish with, I don't want to keep you any longer. The worry now at the moment, of course, is that community cases. Now, community cases, what it means, any country that has community-acquired cases, it means they have acquired the infection, but they have never been before in any country where the infection is taking place or the outbreak is. If that happens in any country, that's going to be really serious, because the virus, it means it's widely spread within the community. Very difficult for us to follow up on the contact cases with those community ones, and makes things more difficult to control. So I hope that was a brief answers. These are brief answers to the questions that I was asked by COVID-19 or COVID fighters, and hope to see you again. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.